Previously, on the last video, we ended on the missing case of Harold Holt. Well, 2 years after his disappearance in the United States, a serial killer was running loose. The infamous identity of this serial killer is Charles Manson. However, before we talk about the horrific crimes of this serial killer, we need to go back to when he first started committing these horrible crimes. In 1967, after being released from prison, Charles Manson would move to San Francisco, California. As he stayed there, he would form a small group of loyal people called the Family. However, this group would grow to around 100 people. The group was essentially a religious cult, and Manson would teach about his religious beliefs. His beliefs were from science fiction and psychology. He would say that there would be a war about the human race, and he said that this would hurt the United States and leave him and his group in power. A few years before Manson moved to San Francisco, he would become really interested in the famous band known as the Beatles. In 1968, the Beatles would release their album called The White Album. Manson would be most interested in their song called Helter Skelter on the album. Manson would say that this song is about the Beatles predicting the human race war he was talking about. Manson would estimate that the war would happen in the summer of 1969. However, the war he talked about didn't happen. Eventually, Manson and his group would go on a killing spree. It is believed that Manson and his group killed 35 people. The group would go and kill celebrities in Hollywood. One of their first and more known victims was Sharon Tate. Sharon lived in a more isolated part of Beverly Hills, but there were still some neighbors. She was also pregnant at the time. On August 9th, 1969, Sharon was spending time with her friends at her home. Late into the night, neighbors reported to hear gunshots at Sharon's home. At 8 a.m. the next morning, the housekeeper discovered the bodies. Sharon was stabbed 16 times, and her unborn child didn't survive. Manson and his group would also be responsible for the murder of Lena LaBaca and Jay Sebring. Manson and his group would go on a murdering spree between August 8th to August 10th of 1969. In October of that year, Manson and his followers were caught on the suspicion of auto theft. They were charged with 9 murders, but like I said, it is believed to be way more. In 1971, Manson and 4 other of his members were sentenced to death. However, the trial was held in California, and in 1972, California abolished the death penalty, so their sentences were changed to life in prison the next year. Eventually, on November 19th, 2017, Charles Manson would die of natural causes at the age of 83. There's a lot to Charles Manson and his cult, and I could probably make an entire video on it, so let me know if you would all want to see that. Randy Stephen Kraft was born on March 19, 1945 in Long Beach, California to parents Harold and Opal Kraft. His father worked as a production operative, and his mother worked several jobs to help support the family. Randy had 3 older sisters who he was very close with, and he was also close with his mother. In school, Randy was known for being very intelligent. When he was a junior in high school, he was placed into accelerated learning classes, and he was a very pleasant person to be around. While growing up, Randy would date girls, but he would soon realize that he was more attracted to men and kept the secret. However, once he enrolled at Claremont College, he would get his first job working as a bartender at a gay bar. Randy would hook up with men at the bar multiple times. Once he got into college, his grades would also start to slip, and he would start drinking and doing drugs. His grades got so bad that he had to repeat classes, which would prevent him from graduating. In 1966, he was arrested after trying to hook up with an undercover cop at Hunting Beach. He wasn't charged from this, so his record remained clean. In 1967, he would eventually graduate with a degree in economics. Shortly after graduating in 1968, he would join the U.S. Air Force. He would do well in the Air Force by ranking up to Airman First Class, and he would also become a supervisor. However, he told high military officials about his sexuality, and he was given a medical discharge. After this, he would tell his family about his sexuality. His parents didn't support his lifestyle at first, but they would eventually accept it. After telling his family, though, he also became distant, just like his father. In 1970, Randy would commit his second crime. Randy would approach a 13-year-old boy named Joseph Francher. Joseph was a runaway, and Randy would tell him that he could stay at his apartment. Randy would also say that he could have sex with a woman he knew. Once Joseph came to Randy's apartment, he was given drugs, and he was sexually assaulted. Luckily, Joseph was able to escape after Randy left for work. He was taken to the hospital, and police would come to question him. Joseph was embarrassed about the sexual assault, and he didn't tell police about it. He also said that the drugs he was given, he agreed to take. Unfortunately, after an only small investigation, Randy was not charged. In 1971, Randy would start his murdering spree. Randy would commit his murders in Southern California. Specifically, he would commit murders in Orange County. Most of his victims were young men from ages 13 to 35, and they were mostly hitchhikers. Randy would offer alcohol in his car, and these victims would go with him. Once they got into the car, Randy would drug them with tranquilizers. After this, he would bind the victims so they can't move, and he would proceed to rape them. After he would kill them from either strangulation, bludgeoning, or asphyxiation, he would dump the bodies near freeways. This would give Randy the nickname the Freeway Killer. By 1975, Randy had 14 victims, and police had no leads on the serial killer. However, the friends of one of Randy's victims recognized Randy's black and white Mustang. Police would go to question Randy, and after questioning him, they thought he was the serial killer. However, the victim was believed to be killed by accident, and no charges were filed. But finally, on May 14th, 1983, Randy was arrested after driving under the influence. Police would investigate his car, and they discovered the body of one of his victims, Terry Lee Gambrell. This time, the police finally decided to not be stupid, and they actually launched an entire investigation of Randy. They found bloodstains and drugs in his car. Randy was charged with Terry's murder, and they would connect his other murders together. In September 1988, Randy's trial would start and last for 13 months. Randy was charged with 16 counts of murder, 1 count of sodomy, and 1 count of emasculation. Randy was given the death penalty. However, Randy is still on death row to this day. He's currently 78 years old, so he will most likely die of natural causes or something. Dennis Rader, also known as the BTK Killer, was born on March 9, 1945 in Pittsburgh, Kansas. However, he and his family moved to Wichita, Kansas, which is where he was raised. His father, William E. Rader, was in the U.S. Marine Corps during World War II, and after he would go to work at the Kansas Electric Utility. His mother, Dorothea M. Rader, worked as a bookkeeper at Leaker's IGA Market in Park City, Kansas. Dennis seemed normal from the outside. He joined the Boy Scouts, and he would also participate in group activities that his church would do. However, secretly, when Dennis was growing up, he would cut out females in magazines, and he would draw ropes and gags on the cutouts, so he wasn't the most normal when he was growing up. After he would finish drawing these pictures, he would glue them onto an index card like they were Pokemon cards, and he would carry them around. He would also get excited in a sexual way when he would read books about murder. He wanted to tie women to train tracks, and he would also tie cats to trees and hang them until they would die. A psychologist named Dr. Terrence G. Leary studied Rader and said that his behavior in his childhood was most likely caused by abuse. Leary believes that in reality his childhood wasn't so stable. Dennis would go to Riverview Elementary School, and he would struggle with school. He was a below average student and was more described as being very introverted. He would eventually graduate in 1963 at Wichita Heights High School, and after he would get a job working at a small grocery store. In 1966, when he was 21, he would join the U.S. Air Force. Even while being in the Air Force, it wouldn't stop him from being weird, because he'd peek through windows and watch women undress, and he would steal women's underwear. Soon after he returned from the Army, he would get married on May 22nd, 1971 to Paula Diaz. In July 1973, he would get a job at a small aircraft manufacturing company called Cessna, but soon after he would go to college at Wichita State University to get a bachelor's degree so he could become a police officer. However, in late 1973, he would get fired from Cessna. He became really unhappy because of getting fired, and it led him to thinking about the dark thoughts that he had had when he was a child. He would eventually start something called trolling. Now, it's not that type of trolling where you film a dead body in the forest, but he would drive around neighborhoods and school campuses and look at young women to lust over. He would stalk women in grocery stores, and he wanted to hide in the back of their car and kidnap them once they got in. By 1974, he was ready to go after his first victims. In the neighborhood that Dennis lived in, a new Latino family moved in called the Oteros. Joseph Otero, who was 38, and his wife Julie Otero, who was 33, had 5 children. Dennis became attracted to Julie and her 11-year-old daughter, Josephine, because they were Latino. He would stalk the family to get to know their routine, and on January 15th, 1974, he would commit his first murders. He grabbed what he called his hit kit, which was knives, a gun, cords, tape, plastic bags, hoods, and gloves. At 7 to 7:30 a.m., he went into the family's backyard and cut their phone line. Dennis would enter the house when one of the children was likely letting the family dog out and the door was open. He was thinking that there was only Julie, Josephine, and their 9-year-old son Joey in the house, but he would discover that Joseph was also in the house. The couple's 3 older children were at school at the time. Dennis broke into the home. After realizing this, he would threaten the family with his gun and then tell them he needed money, food, and a car to flee the home. He would say that he wouldn't hurt them, and he tied them up. However, soon after, Dennis would put a bag over Joseph's head and some cord, and he would strangle him to death. He would do the same thing to the rest of the family. While Dennis was putting the bag over Joey's head, Julie woke up, so Dennis would make his way back over to Julie and kill her by strangling her with a cord. Joey would eventually die from suffocation. Eventually, Josephine woke up, and Dennis would take her to the basement, and he would hang her on a pipe, which is when she would pass away. Unfortunately, the person who discovered the bodies was just one of their older siblings, Charlie, who was just 15 years old at the time. Once he got home from school, he would discover the bodies and try to call police, but the phone lines were cut. He would go get help from a neighbor, and they would call the police. Police would arrive and search the house, and they would find the disturbing scene. To make this even worse, it was reported that Dennis masturbated on some of his victims. Joseph's watch was missing and Julie's purse was dumped out, but besides that, there wasn't anything else that was stolen. Unfortunately, at the time, police were unable to find the killer. To make Dennis's crimes even worse, he would photograph his victims after he killed them. On April 4th, 1974, Dennis would kill Catherine Bray after she returned home with her brother Kevin, which Dennis was not expecting. Like he said to the Otero family, he needed money, food, and a car to escape town. He brought the two into the bedroom and forced Kevin to tie his sister's hands and feet. Dennis would try to tie up Kevin too, but Kevin fought back and was able to escape Dennis. Unfortunately, while the struggle was happening, Kevin wasn't able to get the gun, and Dennis got a hold of it and shot him in the head twice. Dennis would then go back to the other room to finish killing Catherine, but she would also fight back, but she was unfortunately overpowered by Dennis. Dennis realized that trying to strangle her wasn't going to work, so he stabbed her in the abdomen multiple times. While Dennis was with Catherine, Kevin was able to escape the house and get into his car to go get help. Unfortunately, by the time that paramedics got to the home, Catherine Bright was dead. Fortunately, Kevin was able to survive the attack and recover fully. It would be 3 years after this murder that Dennis would kill again. Dennis was driving through neighborhoods when he spotted Shirley Vian. Dennis was planning on going to kill another woman named Cheryl, but she was not home that day. Dennis would go down Hydraulic Street and saw a 5-year-old boy named Steve Rolford. Dennis pulled out a picture of his wife and son and asked if they knew who they were. Steve would say no, and he would return home. It turns out that Steve was the son of Shirley, and it was most likely to test if he would know who he was when he would return to their house. Later, Dennis would return to the house of his next victim, posing as a detective. Steve would answer the door and let him in, since to him he was a detective. There are 3 other people in the house at the time, which were Steve's 2 other siblings and his mom, Shirley Vian. He turned off the TV and shut the blinds. Shirley would come out into the living room and was immediately scared of the stranger in her home. Dennis would lock all 3 of the children in the bathroom. He told Shirley that he wanted to do stuff to her, but told her it wasn't going to be rape. He would calm her down with a glass of water and a cigarette. However, after this, he would strangle Shirley to death with a cord. Dennis would leave when the phone in the house started to ring, which led the 3 children screaming for their mom. After her death, her husband Richard Vian would raise the children. In December 1977, Dennis would obsessively stalk 25-year-old Nancy Fox. On December 8th, Dennis would cut the phone lines and wait for Nancy to get home. When she got home, Dennis would attack her. Just like his other victims, he tied her up and said he had a sexual issue and was going to rape her. After he finished, he would strangle her to death. The following day, he would make a call to police saying, "Yes, we'll find a homicide at 843 South Pershing. Nancy Fox." That's correct. Police would find Nancy's body, and they would replay the police call recording to try to find the identity of this person through their voice, but they couldn't find anything. He had 3 more victims, which were 53-year-old Maureen Hedge in 1985, 28-year-old Vicky Wedgler in September 1986, and his final victim, 62-year-old Dorless Davis. By the time he killed Davis, he thought he was getting too old to kill since he was in his mid-40s. Dennis would hide from the public eye until 2004. It was the 30-year anniversary of the Otero family murder, and the Wichita Eagle newspaper ran an article about it. Also, author Robert Beatty would release a book called Nightmare in Wichita: The Hunt for the BTK Strangler. Both the article and book made Dennis think they were trying to make profit from his murders. On March 17, 2004, Dennis would send a letter to the Wichita Eagle under the fake identity of Bill Thomas Kilman, which the initials read BTK, bind, torture, and kill. The letter contained pictures of Vicky Wedgler and her driver's license. The letter was also signed with the same signature that he had signed with previous letters. This letter sent Dennis back into the public eye. Dennis would send the letter, and in the letter would be a word puzzle like he was the Riddler from Batman. On June 9, 2004, he left a package taped to a stop sign. It included a gruesome description of the Otero murders and a sketch of a body hanging called "The Sexual Thrill Is My Bill." On June 17, 2004, another package was found in the Wichita, Kansas Public Library, which he would say that he was about to pass away and he wanted to kill again. On October 22, 2004, another package was found containing a drawing of children with bindings across their bodies and faces. He would also try to mislead police with false information about BTK. He would say that he was born in Wichita, but in reality he wasn't. Dennis would eventually get the position as the president of his church. 8 days after getting this position, he would say that there was a box with a bomb in the back of a pickup truck. Inside the box there was information about the killings he had done, and there was also a question from Dennis about a floppy disk. Dennis would ask if a floppy disk could be traced, and police would say that it couldn't be traced, which they lied about. On January 25, 2005, a box was found at the Cake TV studio, which contained a doll with a noose around its neck, dead to a pipe, which is the recreation of Josephine Otero's murder. On February 3, 2005, Dennis would send a letter to Cake TV saying that he was going to send a floppy disk. On February 16, 2005, a floppy disk was found and it was traced back to a computer that was used at the church under the name Dennis. They found out that the church's president, Dennis Rader, sent the disk. They would ask Dennis's daughter for a DNA sample to match the semen found at the crime scene. The DNA was a match to the semen, and after 30 years, Dennis Rader was identified as the BTK killer. On February 25, 2005, police surrounded Dennis's car and he was arrested. arrested. Dennis wouldn't talk at first, but eventually he would give a 30-hour confession. Police would find evidence connecting him to his other murders. Dennis was sentenced to life in prison under 10 counts of first-degree murder, and is up for parole in 2180, which, if he somehow lives to 235, I think he might be dying in prison. Dennis is currently in prison at the El Dorado Correctional Facility in El Dorado, Kansas. Gary Ray Bowles, also known as the I-95 Killer, would be convicted of killing 6 gay men from March to October of 1994. Gary would travel to different states by the southern and eastern seaboard. He would go and pretend to be interested in these men and stay at their house for a week. Once he gained these men's trust, he would kill them. After he would kill them, he would stuff toilet paper, rags, dirt, leaves, and sometimes adult toys in his victims' mouths. After killing his victims, he would take their credit card and their car to go kill his next victim. Gary would go on a killing spree, and after killing 6 gay men, he got caught. He would be caught after he killed his last victim, which was 47-year-old Walter Jamel Hinton in Jacksonville Beach. Gary would say that he killed 7 people, but the police wouldn't investigate his 7th victim. Gary was given the death penalty, and he was given lethal ejection on August 22nd, 2019 at Florida State Prison. His last words would be a handwritten apology to the Hilton family by saying he was so very sorry to all of the family and friends of Mr. Hinton, and he would also say, "I never wanted to kill him, and I'm sorry for all the pain and suffering I've caused." Anthony Edward Sowell was born on August 19th, 1959 in Cleveland, Ohio. Anthony was subjected to abuse when he was a child. At just 11 years old, he began to rape his 11-year-old niece. When he was 18 years old, he would enlist into the U.S. Marine Corps, and he would serve for 7 years before being discharged in 1985. Once he returned home, he would start committing crimes, like giving a minor drugs and alcohol, and his crimes would become even worse when he was charged with domestic violence. However, in 1989, Anthony would rape a 21-year-old woman. Luckily, she was able to survive the incident, and Anthony was given 15 years in prison. However, after he got out in 2005, he would begin his killings. His first victim was 38-year-old Crystal Dozier, and she had 7 children. She had been struggling with drug addiction after she lost one of her children. Anthony would lure Crystal with the promise of giving her drugs at his home, but once Crystal got to his home, Anthony raped and killed her. He would go on a killing spree for 2 years, and he would target women that he thought their loved ones wouldn't report them missing. Anthony would be correct because some of his victims weren't even known to be missing until their remains were found. However, Crystal was one of the victims that was reported missing. Police would say that since Crystal was using drugs, they figured that she would be back in a few days. Unfortunately, the police didn't care to look into this at all, which could have saved many victims. It wouldn't be until 2009 that Anthony's killings would end. In September of that year, Anthony was planning on targeting a woman who wanted to get drugs from him. However, similar to all of his other killings, he beat her, raped, and choked her with an electrical cord until she passed out. Luckily, she wasn't dead, and Anthony let her leave. Anthony would threaten her if she went to police about him. She would listen and not go to police right away. So a month later, on October 20th, Anthony promised another woman alcohol and drugs. Once she arrived, she realized she forgot her ID, but Anthony would lunge and attack her. Luckily, she was able to escape by climbing out a 3rd-story window. She was naked, and Anthony's neighbors saw and called the police. However, once police arrived, she refused to speak to them, and Anthony had fled the scene. It turns out, though, that woman eventually went to the police and filed a report. Her attack and the other woman's report allowed police to get a search warrant for Anthony's home. Police would find 2 decomposing bodies and a shallow grave in Anthony's basement. They would find 8 more bodies in total, and a woman's skull wrapped in a paper bag. It was revealed that Anthony had 11 victims in total. Luckily, on Halloween 2009, Anthony would be found and arrested. It turns out that Anthony had spent $20,000 to get new plumbing, grease traps, and sewer lines to hide the smell of the bodies. Anthony's trial was very publicized, and eventually Anthony would be charged on 81 charges, including kidnapping, rape, tampering with evidence, abuse of a corpse, and 11 counts of murder. He was given the death penalty, but would die in February 2021 from natural causes. Anthony's house was demolished, and in replacement, a memorial site called the Garden of 11 Angels is there to remember his victims. Richard Beasley was a serial killer who looked for his victims on the website known as Craigslist. Richard would offer men looking for work $300 a week and housing in a 2-bedroom trailer. His offer would read, "Wanted, caretaker for farm. Simply watch over 688-acre patch of hilly farmland and feed a few cows." More than 100 men responded in desperate need of work. One of these men was 48-year-old Scott Davis. Richard would agree to meet up on November 6, 2011. Richard would also have an accomplice who was 16-year-old Brogan Rafferty. When they met up, Richard gave a fake name, which is Jack, and his accomplice's fake name was Rafferty. and he said that that was his nephew. After they met up at the restaurant, they would leave to go to a wooded area, which is where the farm was. Once they got out, Scott was standing and he heard what sounded like a gun misfiring. Scott was unfortunately shot in the elbow, but he started running. While he ran, his baseball cap that he had on fell off. He eventually made it to a home, which is where he called police. He would lead police to find his hat so they could use it as evidence. When they arrived at the location, they found an empty grave which was meant for Scott. As they investigated, it turned out there was 2 other bodies, which were Ralph Ginger, and the identity of the other body was unknown until 5 days after their investigation started. And they got a call from a woman named Deborah Bruce, who said that her brother David Pauly had replied to an ad similar to the one that Richard put up. She was able to confirm it was David because of the ID bracelet he was wearing when he died. Police would investigate the Craigslist ad posted and trace them to a home in Akron, Ohio, which is where Richard rented the floor of the home using Ralph's identity. Luckily, Richard and his accomplice were arrested on November 16, 2011. During their trial, they were also found being connected to the murder of Timothy Kern. Richard's accomplice was given life in prison on 3 counts of murder, and Richard was given the death penalty. However, Richard's trial was done again in 2020 after a procedural error was found in the 2013 trial, but he was still given the death penalty. Richard is still on death row at the Chillicothe Correctional Institution in Ohio.
Somewhere beyond the sea, somewhere waiting for me,